Imagine a young Marcus Aurelius standing alone in the grand halls of Rome, his shoulders heavy with the weight of an empire. The chaos of the outside world roars like a storm. Political unrest, impending wars, a crumbling economy. Yet in the midst of it all, the emperor stands calm, his eyes fixed on a tattered journal clutched tightly in his hand. This journal, later known as Meditations, would become one of the greatest philosophical works ever written, a collection of Stoic reflections penned by a man whose heart was breaking and whose mind was unyielding. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, he wrote to himself, reminding himself that while he could not control the fate of Rome, he could control his own reactions. To the Stoics, the mind was a fortress, a place where external chaos could never reach unless one allowed it. Marcus understood that the true power of a leader did not come from military might or political influence, but from the ability to master oneself, to remain calm and composed even as the world around him fell apart. And so each night as Rome slept, he would sit alone under the flickering lamplight, pouring his thoughts onto the pages, reminding himself of what truly mattered. The fleeting nature of life, the inevitability of death, the futility of anger, the illusion of control. Marcus knew that the throne was temporary, that power was fleeting, that all men from the poorest slave to the mightiest emperor would eventually face the same end. But while others spent their days chasing power and wealth, Marcus trained his mind to remain indifferent to both, to accept the rise and fall of fortune without complaint. In a world driven by chaos and ambition, he taught himself to find stillness, to remain grounded in the principles of Stoicism, to see every setback as a lesson, every hardship as a test of character, every moment as an opportunity to practice virtue. For Marcus, the Stoic path was not a retreat from life's challenges, but a direct confrontation with them. A path that required unwavering discipline, unshakable resolve, and the courage to face the harshest truths of existence without flinching. And so, as Rome's greatest leader, he faced each day with a steady mind and a calm heart, knowing that true power lay not in the throne he sat upon, but in the mind that could not be shaken by the storms of life. Epictetus, a man born into slavery and subjected to relentless suffering, would rise to become one of Rome's most revered Stoic philosophers. Chained, beaten, and forced to endure a life of servitude, he discovered a profound truth that would become the cornerstone of Stoic philosophy. That while circumstances may control the body, they cannot control the mind. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, he taught, his words echoing through the ages like a battle cry for inner freedom. Epictetus understood that the mind was a fortress, a place where no one could reach unless invited in, a sanctuary of calm in a world ruled by chaos. To his students, he posed a question that would become the essence of Stoic resilience. What is within your control? He taught them to differentiate between what could be changed and what could not, urging them to focus solely on their own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. The world outside was a raging storm of events and circumstances beyond their power, but within the walls of the mind, they could cultivate unbreakable calm, unyielding strength, and unshakable peace. Epictetus likened the mind to a citadel, a stronghold that could not be breached by external forces unless one willingly opened the gates. He urged his followers to protect their inner fortress with the vigilance of a guard, to defend it against the invading armies of fear, anger, and desire. For Epictetus, suffering was not a curse, but a crucible, a forge in which character was tempered and wisdom was born. Each hardship, each trial, each moment of pain was an opportunity to practice the Stoic principles of acceptance, resilience, and self-control. Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, he said, but instead want them to happen as they do, and your life will go well. In these words, Epictetus captured the essence of Stoic freedom, the realization that true power lies not in changing the world but in changing oneself. And so, despite the chains that bound his body, Epictetus remained free, his mind untouchable, his spirit unbreakable, his soul a testament to the indomitable strength of a man who refused to let circumstances define him. For Epictetus, freedom was not a physical state, but a state of mind, a place where suffering was not feared but embraced, where adversity was not avoided but welcomed as the ultimate test of one's inner strength. Seneca, the statesman, philosopher, and advisor to Emperor Nero, was a man who walked the tightrope between power and peril every single day. In the treacherous court of Rome, where betrayal was as common as breath, Seneca lived with the constant shadow of death hanging over him. Yet instead of succumbing to fear, he embraced it, turning the inevitability of death into a source of strength, a compass by which to navigate the chaos of life. "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life," he wrote. "Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books every day." Seneca believed that the greatest mistake one could make was to live as though life would last forever, to squander precious time on trivial pursuits while neglecting the cultivation of the soul. In his letters to Lucilius, he urged his friend to meditate on death daily, not as a morbid fixation, but as a powerful motivator to live fully and without regret. The practice of memento mori, the constant reminder of mortality, became the foundation of Seneca's philosophy. For him, death was not a distant event to be feared, but a constant companion to be acknowledged, a teacher that whispered, your time is limited. Use it wisely." Seneca observed that most people wasted their days in idle talk, in empty distractions, in the relentless pursuit of wealth and power that could be taken away in an instant. "You are afraid of dying," he said, "but how can you fear what you have never experienced?" Instead of fearing the end, he advised his students to fear the wasted moment, the unfulfilled potential, the words left unspoken, the dreams left unrealized. For Seneca, the Stoic life was one of urgency, a life where each day was treated as a complete life unto itself, where each action was carried out with the awareness that it could be the last. In the court of Nero, where death could come with a single command, Seneca remained calm, his mind anchored in the present, his soul untouched by the chaos around him. And when the inevitable finally came, when Nero's order for his execution arrived, Seneca met his end with the same calm composure with which he had met every challenge in life. He did not wail or weep or curse his fate. He accepted it with grace, knowing that he had lived each day as if it were his last, that he had balanced life's books with wisdom, that he had embraced the Stoic path with unwavering resolve. In his final moments, as the poison coursed through his veins, Seneca remained unshaken, a man who had truly learned to live by learning how to die. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Imagine a battlefield where the clash of swords echoes through the air, the ground trembles beneath the weight of charging soldiers, and the air is thick with the scent of blood and smoke. Amidst the chaos, Marcus Aurelius stands firm, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind calm, his heart steady. For the Stoic emperor, life was a series of obstacles, each one a test, each one a chance to practice the virtues he so deeply revered. When his enemies threatened the empire, he did not crumble under the weight of fear. He reframed the threat as an opportunity to demonstrate courage and resolve. When a plague ravaged Rome, killing thousands, he did not despair. He saw it as a chance to practice compassion and fortitude. To Marcus, adversity was not a curse, but a crucible, a forge in which the soul was tempered and refined. He taught himself to welcome challenges, to embrace setbacks, to see every obstacle as an invitation to grow stronger, wiser, more resilient. What stands in the way becomes the way, he reminded himself, repeating the words like a mantra, a battle cry against the forces of fate. This mindset, known as amor fati, the love of fate, became the core of his philosophy. Instead of resisting life's hardships, he welcomed them, seeing each difficulty as a stepping stone toward greater wisdom and inner strength. But this was not a passive acceptance of suffering. It was an active embrace of life in all its forms, a deliberate choice to find meaning even in the darkest of moments. Marcus believed that the true power of a Stoic leader lay not in the throne he sat upon, but in the mind that remained unshaken by the storms of life. He taught himself to see obstacles as allies, setbacks as teachers, losses as lessons. Each challenge was an opportunity to practice virtue, to embody the Stoic principles he held so dear. Courage in the face of fear, patience in the face of delay, gratitude in the face of loss. And so, as the world around him fell into chaos, as war and plague and betrayal threatened to tear Rome apart, Marcus Aurelius remained unbroken, a man who had learned to turn every obstacle into an opportunity, every setback into a stepping stone, every hardship into a path that led him closer to the Stoic ideal. For Marcus, the greatest victory was not conquering the world, but conquering oneself, transforming the very things that sought to destroy him into the very things that made him indestructible. Epictetus, once a slave and later a revered philosopher, taught that true freedom is not found in external circumstances, but in mastering the mind. Imagine a man in chains, his leg shattered by a cruel master, his body battered and bruised. Yet within the confines of slavery, Epictetus discovered a truth that would become the cornerstone of Stoic philosophy, that while others could control his body, they could never control his mind. No one is free who is not master of himself, he said, his words echoing like a declaration of inner sovereignty. Epictetus believed that the key to true freedom lay not in escaping physical chains, but in breaking the mental chains of anger, fear, and desire. He taught his students to distinguish between what they could control and what they could not, to focus solely on their thoughts, actions, and attitudes, and to let go of everything else. If you want to be invincible, he said, then do not enter into combat with things you cannot control. For Epictetus, suffering was not a curse but a teacher, a crucible in which character was forged and inner strength was refined. When his master twisted and shattered his leg, Epictetus did not cry out in anger or despair. Instead, he observed his own suffering as a detached observer, noting the pain without allowing it to penetrate his soul. "You may bind my body," he said, "but my mind remains free." This was the essence of his philosophy, the recognition that while external events are beyond our control, our inner state remains our own, a sanctuary of calm amidst the chaos of life. Epictetus urged his students to practice self-discipline, to train their minds like a soldier trains for battle, to prepare for adversity by rehearsing potential setbacks, losses, and hardships in their minds. This practice, known as premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, was a way to build mental resilience, to fortify the mind against life's inevitable storms. When you kiss your child goodnight, he said, whisper to yourself, tomorrow he may die. This was not a call to pessimism, but a call to presence, a reminder that nothing in life is guaranteed, that everything we love is temporary, that the only thing we truly own is our response. Epictetus believed that the Stoic path was not about escaping suffering, but about transforming it, about using pain as a source of strength, about turning every hardship into a lesson in self-mastery. And so, despite the chains that bound his body, Epictetus remained a free man, his mind a fortress that no one could breach, his spirit unbroken, his will indomitable, a testament to the power of a man who refused to be conquered by anything outside of himself. Seneca, the statesman and philosopher who once held immense power in the court of Emperor Nero, warned against the dangers of unchecked ambition and the illusion of control. Imagine a man standing amidst the opulence of Rome, surrounded by wealth, power, and influence, yet haunted by the constant threat of betrayal and death. Seneca knew that in the ruthless corridors of power, fortunes could change in an instant, and those who clung too tightly to their positions would be the first to fall. He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary, he wrote, urging his followers to let go of the illusion that they could control the uncontrollable. For Seneca, the Stoic path was not about striving for more, but about detaching from desire, about finding peace within rather than seeking it from the world outside. He observed that most people spent their days in a constant state of agitation, chasing after power, wealth, and validation, only to find themselves empty, anxious, and consumed by fear. Seneca advised his students to practice voluntary discomfort, to deliberately go without comforts and luxuries, to remind themselves that they could endure hardship and survive without the things they had convinced themselves they needed. Set aside a certain number of days, he said, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself all the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" This practice of self-imposed hardship was not a punishment but a test, a way to fortify the mind against the unpredictability of fate, to remind oneself that peace is not found in possessions, but in detachment from them. Seneca warned that the man who relies on external things for his happiness is a slave to fortune, forever vulnerable to the whims of fate. But the man who has learned to be content with little, who has trained himself to endure discomfort, who has cultivated an inner fortress of calm, is unbreakable, for he has freed himself from the chains of desire. He does not fear losing what he has, for he has already rehearsed it. He does not dread suffering, for he has already endured it in his mind. Seneca taught that the Stoic path was not about renouncing the world, but about transcending it, about walking through life with calm detachment, seeing everything as temporary, everything as fleeting, everything as an opportunity to practice virtue and self-control. And so, while the world around him crumbled, while Nero's court descended into madness and bloodshed, Seneca remained calm, his mind steady, his soul at peace. A man who had learned to let go of what he could not control and to hold fast to the only thing that truly mattered, the mastery of himself. In the heart of Rome, where power was both a crown and a curse, Marcus Aurelius sat alone in his dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with the scent of burning oil and the weight of unspoken words. Outside, the city roared with the echoes of 1,000 voices, each clamoring for control, for victory, for dominance. But within these walls, the emperor's focus was not on the empire he ruled, but on the mind he sought to master. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wrote, pressing the stylus into the parchment with deliberate force, as if the words themselves could anchor him amidst the storm of life. For Marcus, the true battlefield was not the fields of war, but the mind itself, a vast and unruly terrain where fears, desires, and impulses clashed like armies in a never-ending war. And to lead effectively, he knew he must first conquer himself. The Stoics taught that self-discipline was the highest form of power, that the man who could control his own thoughts and actions was mightier than any king or general. Marcus trained himself to detach from external outcomes, to remain calm amidst chaos, to focus solely on what he could control: his mind, his reactions, his virtues. He likened the mind to a citadel, a fortress that could only be breached if one willingly opened the gates to fear, anger, or desire. in the chaos of war, when allies became traitors and trusted generals conspired against him. Marcus remained unshaken, his mind a fortress of calm amidst the chaos. He reminded himself daily that nothing external could truly harm him unless he allowed it to enter his mind. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, he wrote, transforming every obstacle into an opportunity to practice virtue, every setback into a stepping stone toward inner mastery. And in doing so, he became not just a ruler of men, but a ruler of himself, a man whose power lay not in his armies, but in his ability to remain unshaken, unyielding, and undaunted, even as the world around him crumbled. For Marcus, the path to true leadership began within, in the silent chamber of the mind, where every thought was a choice, every decision a test, every moment an opportunity to practice the Stoic virtues of courage, wisdom, justice, and self-discipline. And through that practice he forged himself into a leader whose legacy would endure long after the empire itself had fallen. Epictetus, a man born into slavery and bound by chains, understood that the only true freedom was the freedom of the mind. "Who then is invincible?" he asked, his voice calm, his gaze unflinching. "The one who cannot be disheartened by anything outside his control." Imagine a man stripped of all possessions, beaten, humiliated, and left with nothing but his thoughts. Yet instead of succumbing to despair, Epictetus chose to rise, to master the only thing that no master could ever take from him, his mind. For the Stoic slave, suffering was not a curse but a crucible, a forge in which the soul was tempered and refined. He taught his students that life would break them, that fate would throw them into storms and set fires to all they held dear, but that the mind could remain untouched, invincible, untamed. "You may fetter my leg," he said, "but not even Zeus can fetter my will." Epictetus urged his followers to distinguish between what they could control and what they could not, to surrender the latter and focus solely on the former. The Stoic path was not about changing the world, but about changing oneself, about accepting what is while mastering how one responds. "When something happens, the only thing in your power is your attitude toward it," he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "You can either accept it as a gift or reject it as a curse." Epictetus believed that adversity was a training ground, a place where the soul was tested and the mind was sharpened. He instructed his students to visualize the worst that could happen: the loss of wealth, the betrayal of friends, the onset of illness, and to ask themselves, could I endure it? Would it destroy me? Would I remain unbroken? This practice, known as premeditatio malorum, was not a call to pessimism but a call to strength, a way to face life's inevitable hardships with unflinching courage. Epictetus knew that suffering was inevitable, that pain was unavoidable, but that the mind was a fortress that no enemy could breach unless invited in. And so, he trained himself to endure without complaint, to rise without resentment, to stand firm in the face of every storm, knowing that the only true freedom was the freedom to choose one's response, to control one's mind, to remain unbroken even as the world around him fell apart. For Epictetus, the measure of a man was not in what he owned or what he accomplished, but in how he faced the storms of life, in how he remained calm in the midst of chaos, in how he refused to let suffering define him or fate determine his worth. Seneca, the statesman and philosopher who served as an advisor to one of Rome's most ruthless emperors, understood that power without wisdom was a double-edged sword. "It is not that we have a short time to live," he wrote, "but that we waste a lot of it." Imagine a man surrounded by wealth, influence, and the constant threat of betrayal. Seneca had everything: wealth beyond measure, connections to the most powerful men in Rome, and a life of luxury that most could only dream of. Yet despite all his riches, he knew that time was the only true currency, the only possession that could never be reclaimed once spent. "You act like mortals in all that you fear," he said, "and like immortals in all that you desire." Seneca warned against the illusion of endless tomorrows, the delusion that life was something that could be postponed for later, that real living could wait until the perfect conditions aligned. He urged his followers to treat each day as a complete life in itself, to live as if each breath were their last, to act as if each word were their final one, to seize each moment as a gift that would never come again. "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life," he said. "Let us balance life's books every day." Seneca believed that the man who feared death was a slave, chained not by physical bonds but by the mental chains of fear and regret. To free oneself, he taught, one must practice memento mori, the daily meditation on death, not as a morbid fixation but as a powerful call to action. "Let us say goodbye to all things trivial," he said, "for each day we die a little." Seneca advised his students to reflect each night before sleep, to review their actions, to ask themselves, "What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? How could I live more fully tomorrow?" This practice, known as the evening reflection, was a tool for accountability, a way to confront the inevitability of death with clarity and composure, to live each day with intention and purpose, to ensure that when death finally came, it would find them ready, unafraid, and without regret. In the stillness of contemplation, the universe whispers its secrets, waiting only for a heart that is open enough to listen. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca each walked a different path. Yet all three men converged on the same Stoic truth, that life is not defined by what happens to us but by how we respond to it. Imagine a man standing alone atop a hill, the wind howling around him, the world crumbling beneath his feet. The battles have been fought, the wars have been waged, the power has been lost, and now, in the stillness of the night, he is left with only himself and his thoughts. For Marcus, it was the weight of an empire that tested him, the burden of ruling Rome during its most chaotic era. "Do not act as if you have 10,000 years to throw away," he wrote. "Death stands at your elbow. Be good for something while you live." Marcus understood that time was a gift, that each moment was an opportunity to practice virtue, to remain calm amidst chaos, to find meaning in the mundane. He did not seek to escape life's trials, but to meet them with grace and composure, to transform suffering into strength, loss into wisdom, adversity into fuel for the soul. For Epictetus, it was the chains of slavery that forged his spirit, the cruel hand of a master that tested his resolve. "No man is free who is not master of himself," he said, a declaration of sovereignty from a man who owned nothing but his mind. Epictetus taught that freedom was not a matter of circumstance but of choice, that a man could be in chains yet still be unbroken, that true power lay not in possessions but in the ability to control one's own mind. He urged his followers to remember that they were not what happened to them but what they chose to become, that every setback was a lesson, every hardship a chance to practice self-mastery. And for Seneca, it was the treacherous court of Nero that tested his resolve, a place where life and death hung in the balance, where power was as fragile as a single breath. "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life," he said. "Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books every day." Seneca understood that the man who feared death would never live fully, that those who spent their days chasing wealth and power would die empty, unfulfilled, and haunted by regret. He urged his students to embrace memento mori, to remember that life was short, that every moment mattered, that the time to live was now. And so the Stoics taught that life was not a matter of avoiding suffering but of facing it with courage and clarity. that power was not found in thrones or empires, but in the mastery of one's own mind, that the only true wealth was a life lived fully, a life spent in the pursuit of wisdom, a life unburdened by fear, a life that, in the end, could be left behind without regret.